Thank you for being here. Welcome to Community Circles. Again, I'm Breanne Sanchez, the Director of Nonprofit Relations for the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines. And our goals for these community circle conversations are really to build trusting relationships and share knowledge and resources with the Central Iowa nonprofit sector. Our expectation this morning is just really to continue to center our dialogue around the common goals and remaining rooted in equity and inclusion, which is really going to be central to our topic today. And then as housekeeping, just a reminder to mute and turn off your video during the presentation. If I have to mute you in this main room when we zoom you into the breakouts, it makes it where you can't then turn your audio back on. So hopefully we'll just hold off on that unless you're presenting. So, all right, let's go to the next one. We do have a few announcements. I know, and I will pop into the chat our events page just as a reminder. We have this opportunity for Fired Up fundraising. It is a free training and it will sell out, I believe. So go ahead, and if you are interested in registering for the Susan Howlett event, I would do so sooner rather than later. I would encourage you to invite your board chair or fundraising chair or development staff to sign up because this will be a great opportunity to kind of help boards better understand their role in building resources for your organization. Then I did also just want to highlight the Tomorrow Plan series. The Community Foundation is a partner in putting those events on. We'll have James Chung talking about rebuilding toward greater resiliency, and that is coming up next week. September 23rd, I think, is next week. And then I'll have some more information at the end about a Give DSM relaunch and demo. So that's exciting. If you have organizational announcements, please go ahead and pop those in the chat for folks so we can follow everything you're doing. I know when we were kicking off, I was talking with Luke Lynch just really briefly about some of the United Way Powered by Purpose work. And I know United Way also has the 21-day equity challenge that's kicking off here in a few weeks. So feel free to just pop in some information into the chat if you have something that you think everyone would be interested in. So let's go to the next slide. We are going to be speaking about inviting awareness of intersectionality today. And if intersectionality is a newer word in your vocabulary, it is a newer word, I think, in the lexicon in general. But this is, I have a definition up here. It's the complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, combine, overlap, or intersect. So we've been talking a lot in the sector about what equity and inclusion look like in our spaces. And I'm really excited about the group that, or the two presenters that we have to be in conversation with today. And I would encourage you to feel free to send questions in the chat. We're really kind of having a loose conversation today, and would invite you to share any questions or information there. Then we'll be also breaking out and exploring some questions together, and then ending with some network updates as we do. So let's go to the next slide here. And I'd like to invite our guest speakers today, Rayma McCoy-McDeed, who's Executive Director of Central Iowa Center for Independent Living and a consultant on intersectional diversity, to join us with video and audio. And then Matt Unger, who's CEO of the Des Moines Area Religious Council, frequently known as DMARC. If you would like to turn on your video, Matt. And Matt and Rayma, welcome. Thanks so much for being here today and joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, I'd like you first, Rayma, if you just wanted to tell us a little bit about your organization. I think it's been going for about 5 years. Is that right?
Well, I've been going.
You've been going for
about
5
years.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about, or tell us a little bit more about the Central Iowa Center for Independent Living and what you all do. And then Matt, I'll invite you to do the same for DMARC.
Yes, so Central Iowa Center for Independent Living, or CISL, is a human services agency that provides support to disabled people in Polk and surrounding counties. And prior to the pandemic, the big thing that we did was support disabled people to find and maintain employment. And because of the shifting paradigms that are rapidly occurring in the U.S., we have also shifted gears to facilitate conversations about race and equity in nonprofit spaces, human services spaces, that kind of thing. CISL has been around since 1990. We like to say that CISL is as old as the Americans with Disabilities Act. So both celebrated their 30th anniversary this year. And we really appreciate the opportunity to facilitate conversations about race, equity, disability, diversity, inclusion, and everything in between. And look forward to doing that this morning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rema. And we got the opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation, and shout out to Daniel Hoffman-Zinnel, who I know is on the phone or joining us today. He connected us, and Rema, her contact information is also in our consultant database, which I'll pop into the chat later. And I think you have a little small person guest visitor, Rema. We're all about that in community circles. So we acknowledge kind of the environment that everyone is working in these days. So if your small person feels the need to crawl into your lab at any point, that's just fine. So thanks for that overview. And then Matt, if you wanted to tell us a little bit about DMARC and maybe just kick off how you got connected with Rema.
Sure. So DMARC is an interfaith organization made up of roughly 200 congregational members and supporters from 5 different faith backgrounds that have come together around the idea of meeting human needs. And the way we manifest that most is through our food pantry network. So we have a food pantry network in the community. There's 14 food pantries in the metro and in the suburban areas. Roughly in 2019, we served 56,000 unique individuals across the community. And what we do is we try to supply a consistent, reliable set of food each month with a focus on health and nutrition and providing produce. So each month, someone can come to any one of our pantries and get a 3 to 4 day supply of food for them and their families that is nutritious. We go out and source foods through partnerships we have with the food bank, and then partnerships that we have with food drives. And then roughly about half of what we get, we go out and purchase in the wholesale market. I think what makes us a little bit more unique is that we do have this focus on nutrition and on having consistent items, because dignity is really important to us in our pantry network. We want the shopping experience to be as close to a grocery store shopping experience as it can be, to where, you know, when you go to the grocery store, some days you never run into the situation where they don't have peanut butter. We want to have those reliable things available for folks all the time. The other thing about our pantry network that's a little more unique is that we collect a lot of data, and then we can take that data to better understand the situations happening on the ground and use it in an advocacy way to sort of prove the stories that we have. You know, we've all heard stories from a lot of people facing food insecurity, and they really get at your heart, and sometimes are really gut-wrenching. But when you go to policymakers, if you don't have the data to back it up, it's hard to get anything done. So we've focused on data really since about 2014, trying to understand sort of the situations of the clients that are being assisted in the pantry network, and to understand what programs they're taking advantage of, so we know which programs are important to them to advocate on their behalf and protect. If you follow things happening at the legislature at all, you know that a lot of the programs that folks facing food insecurity rely upon have been under attack really constantly for the last 3 years. So we've really been in a protect mode the last several years, trying to make sure we keep those programs strong. So the sort of third arm of what we focus on that's a little bit different than some other pantry networks is that advocacy. And it was through that advocacy avenue kind of that Rayma and I got connected through a couple other team members that we have here at DMARC. And Rayma was looking for sort of a food partner to make sure that folks with disabilities weren't being a missing gap in the food needs as we kind of shifted and changed everything once COVID happened. So that was sort of our initial introduction to each other. We were able to form a pretty cool partnership, I think, to provide deliveries to a population of at least 50 folks that SISL works with. And we've had that going, I think, for just over a month now, or not quite a month. And by all accounts, it's working pretty well for those that are taking advantage of it. But through that connection, we also started talking about equity and inclusion and about what Rayma does in a consulting capacity. And she very graciously offered to bring that to our organization as we were in a time of trying to figure out, you know, shortly after the murder of George Floyd, what and how do we start examining things inward here to make sure that we're doing our level best to be an inclusive organization, and that we aren't, whether intentional or unintentionally, providing barriers to that being possible.
Great. Well, we've been talking a lot in this Community Circles series about the power of building relationships, and even in crisis, to be thinking of new and better ways to serve our community together. So Rayma, can you maybe talk a little bit about you know, the potential gaps that you saw as you were reaching out to DMARC, and maybe some of the ways in which you approached that partnership to make sure that it was centering kind of intersectional equity?
Sure. So, like Matt said, you know, we initially connected for a very proactive or very practical reason. We had folks who are connected to SISL who, for reasons related to the pandemic primarily, were not able to physically go to food pantries as they had done prior to the pandemic. And so we wanted to meet that need and bring the food pantry to them, so to speak. And so DMARC already had a program in place that provides for delivery opportunities for people. And so we wanted to expand it so that it was inclusive specifically of our target population. And invariably, as that conversation was happening, conversation about what's happening on a wider scale in our society also crept into that, and so I made it known that I on behalf of SISL and just independently facilitate conversations about disability, diversity, intersectionality, race, equity, primarily in nonprofit spaces. And the reality is that the conversations that need to be had in nonprofit spaces need to be focused on systemic barriers to inclusion. I think that the nonprofit sector has really struggled to engage in these conversations because the focus has been more on overt manifestations of racism. Which we don't typically see in the nonprofit sector. It's not typical that we hear people calling other folks the N-word or putting up Confederate flags in their cubicles in nonprofit spaces. And so I think that people have struggled to see that racism does exist in this sector. It just manifests in a more covert manner and is kind of an underpinning beneath the infrastructure of the organizations that we work in. In fact, the nonprofit sector exists primarily because the for-profit corporate sector is so focused and profits so dearly off of the oppression of racially marginalized people. The nonprofit sector exists to kind of provide service and support to people who've been impacted by that in our society. And so therein lies one of the core manifestations of racism in the sector. And so if an organization is wanting to begin conversations about systemic racism in the sector or within the organization itself, coming to terms with that somewhat inconvenient truth is really at the forefront of how to begin doing that work. Otherwise, organizations tend to end up in a place where they're spinning their wheels and fixated on the question of how do we get more diversity here? How do we do outreach? Well, there are things that need to happen before that happens, because diversity and outreach are very focused on superficial, bringing people of color into a structure without addressing the systemic reasons why diversity is struggling to manifest in the structure in the first place. And so for a variety of reasons, there's been a bit of a sea change in the nonprofit sector this year, and we are finally open to having those conversations about the structural. And fortunately, organizations like DMARC here in central Iowa are willing to entertain those conversations. And so that's really exciting to see happen in central Iowa. And I hope that other organizations get on board with regards to entertaining these conversations, because it really could help the nonprofit sector in central Iowa kind of lead the way as far as how to have these conversations and how do these conversations ultimately enhance the positive outcomes for the organizations that are willing to facilitate and participate in them.
Thank you, Rima. I think that's so important. A lot of times what we hear is, you know, oh, well, maybe if we look at our board matrix and we just add a few, you know, board members of color or something, that's going to, you know, solve our problem with being you know, majority white kind of organization. And so Matt, can you talk a little bit about how DMARC took it upon themselves to do kind of that critical self-work before, you know, exploring what are the implications for kind of all your stakeholders, the people that you serve, if you can't look internally first and figure out, kind of to Rema's point, you know, where are microaggressions potentially happening in a culture, or you know, what other barriers are out there? And I know that you had mentioned right at the beginning that you serve 5 different faith communities, or and so diversity, you know, is kind of part of DMARC's history. But can you talk a little bit about how you approached this and you know, kind of fostering open hearts towards this work?
Yeah, sure. So we just recently redid our strategic plan, and one of the things we put as a main focus in that is looking at systemic change around the clients that we serve. And we ratified that in January. And just as we were starting to look at, okay, what does that look like and how do we start looking at that, you know, everything kind of blew up in this country, for better or worse, and I hope eventually for much better. And I think what really sparked it for us is we started to see this spate of statements start coming out. And I don't harbor any ill will towards anyone that put out one of those statements, but we made a conscious decision not to. And I kind of have this maxim I live by, that if you're going to demonstrate, you got to have your demons straight. And I wanted to make sure if we are going to say anything, you know, there has to be action behind that, and it can't just be words. I spent 12 years of my career in politics, and I've been around just words way too much. So that really spurred us looking inward and saying, okay, how do we do this? First of all, we know there's a lot we don't understand that we need to understand. what is it? And we kind of tried to break things into 3 buckets. What can we learn? What can we change about how we do things and how we're set up? And sort of then how do we open the door and be welcoming and have that not just be appearance, but people feel it and know it and feel the welcome. So to that extent, how do we change a little bit to look more like the community we assist? Because I'll just be candid, we are a almost completely white staff and almost completely white board. And in trying to look at these challenges, we've always, with our clients, tried to include their voice in how we make changes to the way we operate. And we don't have enough of racial diverse voices in our organization to be able to have that conversation just kind of in an echo chamber. So we knew we needed to bring other folks to the table to help us through that process. And then, you know, kind of through happenstance, got the connection with Rayma. And I think in trying to get our staff on board with it, it wasn't a hard thing to do. We can be a difficult group to corral. You know, when you look at our staff, we got people that are on trucks all days, people that are working in a warehouse, office folks. So to find, just forcing the group that, hey, we're going to find and make time for this, which is not an easy thing to pull off in our world. But everyone committed to it right away. I think the moment wasn't lost on our team because I think we see it in a more magnified way with the work that we do. So it wasn't a hard move to make, especially as you mentioned, Brianne, when we're an organization that is rooted in religious diversity. We've got an example over a almost 75-year history of folks with different ideas and different backgrounds coming together around commonality. So it seemed, I think, for most of us, like this was the natural thing to do. We're just late to the table.
Great. I think, you know, all those of you who've been with me week after week, I like to speak in analogies. That's how I make sense of the world. And so what I'm hearing maybe is some of the approach that the sector has had around diversity is just maybe to plant different seeds. And what Rayma's point is that you have to first make sure that the soil is good and strong enough so that those, you know, diverse seeds or members can thrive. And so Rayma, how do you, when you're working with a sector, go beyond a one-time workshop to really make sure that there's an ongoing commitment to kind of making sure that that soil for intersectional equity is there?
That's funny. I do love popcorn, as you know.
I do love popcorn. And then they gave us the.
That's a great question.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Well.
Yep.
So this is just.
It's like we got a few folks.
Yeah, I'm
that
just
might
gonna
be muted.
try and figure out who's not on mute for me.
That one. And then this is just.
Okay, there we go. Got a couple.
There you
We'll
go.
just we're muting you, and if you there we go. All right, thank you.
So there's been historically a focus with regards to quote unquote diversity conversations in places of employment on you know, just sort of like a blanket training, one size fits all. We're going to have general conversation, and everybody's going to fit into this, and you end up with, you know, a plurality of the participants who kind of check out and think this is something that, you know, the organization or the business is going to take care of this, and just tell me what I need to do, and so I'm just going to kind of play on my smartphone, and then you've got another segment of the population of employees who get really super invested, but leave the training without a clear understanding of what the role is, because the training is either so general or so focused on not offending anybody that there's nothing meaty there to take away. And then you got a significant, typically segment of the population that has no interest whatsoever in the subject matter, feels like it's inappropriate, divisive, end of story. And that's fine. It's fine to have a mixture of a little bit of everything come to the trainings, because ultimately, systems are created by people coming together and committing to perpetuating them. And so with regards to my approach, it's very focused on the individual and really hammering away at folks and reminding them that they have a vital role in either confronting the system or perpetuating it, no matter what their role is, from entry level up to CEO to board member to whatever. So this idea that we can check out and let the decision makers handle it is something that I really work hard to dispel when doing these trainings. And so with regards to getting the soil ready per se, that is my approach, is reminding people that they are the soil. They also are the seed. We all have configurations of both within us, and are vital to the growing of the conversation and the evolving of the organization as a result. And so that can be a very difficult message for people to ingest, so to speak. This is difficult subject matter for many people, white people. It's very cathartic subject matter for the rest of us. We are eager to have these conversations to a certain extent. I also want to put out there that we also, those of us who are racially marginalized, experience a certain amount of trepidation because we have had experiences perhaps at previous places of employment that have shown us that these types of conversations can be traps for us if we have the audacity to be too honest when the subject of race and equity pops up. And as a result of our candor becoming punished as a result. Mm-hmm. And so I mention that just in case people are thinking about entertaining these types of conversations in their places of employment, don't necessarily expect racially marginalized people to throw our hands in the air and get really excited. We need a certain amount of time to determine whether or not this is going to be a real conversation, and whether or not we are going to experience ramifications for, being candid and presenting feedback to our organization that could really positively impact the systemic issues that theoretically are the why behind entertaining these types of conversations in the first place. And so, as we're thinking about the soil, so to speak, keeping in mind that the racially marginalized members, deserve a fair amount of time to determine whether or not it's safe to operate as soil and seed along with coworkers as well is incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, Matt, can you talk a little bit about where DMARC is in this then, and where you guys are going from that standpoint? And then we'll have a chance in our breakouts for participants to talk with each other kind of about where they and their organizations are in this work, and maybe that can be a helpful conversation, hopefully. So maybe if you could kick us off a little bit with where DMARC is.
Sure. So we expanded our sessions with Rhema. It took 2 sessions. They were 2 hours each. So that was really step one. And the first day was really about trying to understand things better. And the second session was a little bit more about, now here's where the action happens, without taking too much thunder away from Rayma. Also don't want to, spoiler alert for any of you that have the training, and I would very highly recommend her. So upon completion of that, we stood up a staff equity and inclusion committee that is really focused on those three buckets that I talked about before. So the first being continuing education, continuing to bring in folks from different communities, different backgrounds to help us better understand their experiences, how they see things, how the world has treated them, and what our role is in fixing that. Then also an examination of our policies and procedures to take what we learn from these educational opportunities and move that into redesigning how we do things so that we're not marginalizing anyone, that we're being equitable in the way that we provide assistance, and that we're reaching the communities that need to be reached with the assistance that we're trying to offer. And then from a sort of recruitment standpoint for staff, volunteers, board members, committees, how do we engage and involve ourselves in the communities that we want to have representation from in our organization to build that trust and show that authenticity that I think Rayma's getting at, that yes, this is an organization that wants our voice, that needs our voice, and that wants us to be a part of it. So, you know, it's a lot to take on, but we're just getting started, and I feel like our group is really energized about trying to make this change, because it will make the other changes we're trying to make to other systems that much easier to make. And if we can broaden the voice of those speaking about it and the sort of connectiveness between us all behind the issues we're trying to change, it's going to be a lot easier to do. And it's just the better way to do it.
Great. Well, I'm going to set up the breakout rooms, and then while I'm doing that, I'm learning, give you a chance for some final thoughts. So we'll go to the next slide so that folks joining us can make a decision about which room is the room that they want to be in. In the main room, if you don't feel like you are in the mindset of talking about our discussion questions, I'm going to be talking about our October topics and just kind of a free for all in the main room. But if you want to join us for our breakouts, if you could put in front of your name the number room 1 or 2, and then we'll assign folks out. If we have a ton in one, I'll probably break it into an additional room. But if you could just take a moment to do that, that'll help me assign everybody out. And then folks who are just joining us, that'll be about 20 minutes of conversation. And so I'll invite Rayma and Matt, kind of what are your final pieces or thoughts, looking at these questions and how the nonprofit sector can explore this, as an individual contributor, as a leader, organizationally. Do you have any kind of parting pieces of advice? And you're welcome to join us also in these breakout rooms. I do want to say that.
So I'll go. I had a very interesting experience recently. I had a former employer reach out to me and ask for guidance with regards to the race and equity thing, quote unquote. Mind you, this former employer is an employer that I had experienced a disciplinary action for engaging in what they had determined to be divisive conversation about race and equity. Imagine that, right? And I mention that because I really want folks who are with us this morning, especially folks who supervise other people, to keep this in mind. as you are brainstorming how to facilitate conversations about race and equity at your place of employment, are you reaching out to racially marginalized staff that you had perhaps previously chastised or coached about being divisive for bringing up conversations about race and equity? Are you reaching out to them now and asking for guidance and feedback about the very same subject matter that they had been punished for engaging in conversation about in the past? If so, think very heavily, think very critically about that. Also, instead of reaching out to racially marginalized staff for guidance about this, consider investing in reaching out to a consultant or a coach. This is something that benefits from financial investment on the part of an organization. Budget accordingly. This is not something that organizations should expect come to them either through staff or through an volunteer advisory council at no cost. You typically, organizations don't think twice about paying dearly for consultants with regards to strategic planning or needs assessments or that kind of thing. Why are we thinking that this type of expertise should come to an organization at no cost? It doesn't make sense. If you're really serious about your organization engaging in these critical conversations, then you need to be serious about investing financially. Fortunately, the Community Foundation of Des Moines, as Brianne mentioned, has a database of consultants that do this work in this community. So seek out that database and connect with somebody that can support your organization accordingly.
Great, thanks, Rama. That's really helpful. Matt, any thoughts before we zoom everybody into their rooms quickly?
I won't add a ton on that. I will echo one lesson that I learned from Rama is you've got to put your money where your mouth is and put the investment behind this work, which we've moved some things to do. But from a leadership perspective, I think, sometimes when you don't know where to start, it can be tough to get started, but just start. If you haven't started doing this work yet, just find a place to start and start there. There's not really a right or wrong answer to getting going with this. And it's just about getting going, and then the rest of it will kind of make itself evident to you. And be okay with getting uncomfortable, because a lot of this is going to be uncomfortable conversations that will eventually, it's the idea, a little pain up front makes you feel better in the end. So just don't be afraid to start.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open up those rooms. Matt and Rama, I have assigned you to some different rooms also, I believe. I think, Matt, I have you in room 1, but I'm going to move you to room 2, just
Okay.
so that you aren't in the same one. I'll open those up and we'll come back with about 3 minutes to spare if you're able to join us. So thanks so much. Go ahead and just accept the breakout invitation to get going. And I'll get started here in the main room in just a minute as I zoom them some new questions. And you can chat me if you haven't been able to get assigned and you'd like to. Okay, let's see. Yes, and I have Angie had added the For Equity tool as a tool for starting these conversations. We'll make sure to share that again when we when we come back. So I did, for those of you who are with us, oops, Katie, it looks like I have to assign you yet. If anybody wants to have a conversation about October with me, I am seeking input, especially on great governance during this time of challenge. Do you know of a fabulous board chair, for instance, who you would recommend to come and talk, either in a panel or to speak on what are the strategic questions that those kinds of board leaders can be asking. So go ahead and let me know if you want to talk about that. Otherwise, I will be quiet.
Hate to do it, but I gotta run.
Sure. Yeah.
Soon.
See ya. All right. Flying back. I was just saying, I really love when it takes like the full 2 minutes for folks to get back and wrap up the conversations, because it's a sign to me that people had a lot to say and to connect on the topic. So that's great. Well, it looks like people will be zooming back here in just a minute. I think we've got, I don't know. We've got folks coming back to us. So welcome back. Just wanted to close and thank Rema and Matt for spending time and conversation with us today and kind of sharing the power of collaboration, of partnership, and approaching these really important issues to strengthen our sector. And so just looking ahead, I also wanted to call out, I know Angie always does a good job of popping that For Equity tool into the chat. If you're trying to if you're trying to figure out where to start, that's a good tool to help you get started. October 7th is the next community circle, and I am working on identifying board chairs to come and speak with us about governance in times of crisis, and how, from the chair's perspective, what kind of strategic questions we should be asking. And so if you have a truly dynamic board chair who has been helping to lead through this time, and you want to make a connection for me, that would be really great. I'm thinking that that will be our topic. I also have been speaking with the folks at DSM Hack. They will not be having their 2021 hackathon. So we're trying to think about ways in which they can support the sector. And if you're going to be working remotely kind of for an extended period continually through the year, they might have some good collaborative tools and tips for us. So I think they might join us in October or November as well. I also wanted to call out that we will be hosting on October 8th at 10 a.m. a Give DSM nonprofit user demonstration. We will be revamping that site, which I'm pretty pumped about. There's going to be a lot of increased functionality for our nonprofit friends. To track who's giving and how much traction that each of those funding needs is getting. So if you haven't been using Give DSM as an organization, now might be a time to get in there. And then on our events page, we have the sign up for that demonstration. So if you have a development staff or somebody who might be interested in that, that would be wonderful. Again, just final thank you to you all for joining us for conversation, especially Rema and Matt, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks so much.